Grüß Gott, meine Damen und Herren.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The time has come once again for the ITB interjections. For the 19th time this year. Since 1999, the Institute for Tourism and Development has been addressing a socio-political issue which is a challenge for tourism. The topic we're looking at today is politics as a seismograph, a new factor in travel. Tourism has rarely been influenced by so many factors as is currently the case. The old rule was that if there are problems in popular tourist destinations, price reductions sorted things out. Well, that rule doesn't hold true any longer. People are no longer prepared to accept, for example, political disruption and questions of safety. These are not the only factors that affect how people decide to travel to a destination. Political issues are important. Political situation is taken into account. Issues such as cultural diversity, persecution of minorities, racist attitudes in parts of the population, dictatorial tendencies of politicians. Tourists look at one-off events such as attacks, but they also look at political sea changes as well. But why is it that we get very different responses to seemingly similar phenomena? In some cases, if politicians are dictatorial, that has a very negative impact on visitor numbers. Whereas at the same time, when the situation certainly looks the same, the destination remains just as attractive as ever. Why is it that in one case, people have misgivings about going to a country where there are human rights violations, but in other cases, they don't mind at all, it seems? How do tourists decide if they should visit a destination for political reasons? When do they decide not to do this? For which target groups does a destination become unacceptable? And at what point in time? What's the role of travel agents? What's the role of politics? What's the role of the media? And what impact does that have on our scope for action? The other side of the coin is the question of what all of this means for the local populace, for those who are directly affected on the spot, for the staff in the domestic tourism market, for craftspeople and fishermen and everybody else who survives directly or indirectly thanks to tourism. They're the ones who are most directly affected, and they're the ones whose voice is often not heard at all. I'm delighted that we have such high-caliber experts with us today. I'd like to welcome Andreas Stopp from Deutschlandfunk. He will be moderating the discussion once again. I'd also like to welcome Christiane Schlützer, Sören Hartmann, and Professor Dr. Hans Hopfinger. Mr. Stopp, in a moment, will tell you more about those who are involved in this panel discussion. I'll hand over to Andreas Stopp now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Dr. Dietlin von Lasberg, Vice Chairwoman of the Institute for Tourism and Development, E.V. It's a non-profit organization. If the Institute for Tourism and Development did not exist, we would not be here. It's a lengthy tradition, only 45 minutes this year. So we'll have to hurry to get everything in. 45 minutes today, as I said. Since 1999, these ITB interjections have been organised. I don't know how you feel, ladies and gentlemen, but if you look at how very busy it is here at the ITB and how much hustle and bustle there is, and in the light of that, I think it's fair to say that the tourism sector is doing very well. Indeed, there seems to be an unprecedented upturn for the tourism sector. You can see this in the figures. 31 billion euros is what the Germans spent on tourism. That was both domestically and internationally. 8.2 increase in turnover for 2017. and a similar increase, or even a greater increase, is expected for 2018. This is what I learned in preparation for this debate. All of that is currently happening in a world which is, of course, not quite so intact. There are crises left, right and centre all over the world. There's political unrest. Some countries have decided to go it alone. There are egoistical politicians determining event. Think of countries such as Italy as well. Now, do you notice what's going to happen on the political front there and what impact the new government will have there once it's taken shape? What about Poland and Hungary, where there's such anti-EU trends? In this era of political instability, nonetheless, we see bookings by tourists shooting up. How does all of this hang together? That's what we want to address today. We're looking at the question of whether politics is a kind of seismograph, whether this is a new factor in the travel sector, just as security used to be, or numbers of hours of sunlight, or indeed the price factor. So what role does politics play in this context? Søren Hartmann, thank you for finding the time to join us. Lots of people, journalists, travel agents, academics, are very much in demand. Der Tour is the leading travel agent for individual trips in Germany and Austria. Der Tour is part of the DER touristic group. 131 firms. I believe you got even more now. You've got France as 132, over 10,000 staff in 14 different countries. I guess it's 15 now that you've got France on board as well. Well, there's a whole host of different countries as well, because we have destinations in various different countries. 7 million people have travelled with you over the last years, picking up on the various different offers available. Also to Turkey now, I believe you hit the headlines as well. The foreign minister of Turkey yesterday called for Germany to calm down a bit when it comes to travel warnings. Now, an official Turkish representative has pointed this issue out. Does that mean that governments can have an impact on travel behaviour through a travel warning, as for example the one from Germany? What happens at the highest political level? Travel warnings issued by the German Foreign Office should be neutral and should above all be politically neutral. That's my first clear statement. The question is one of safety of our clients. The idea is to allow travellers to appraise the security situation in a country in a neutral fashion. The foreign minister and above all the foreign ministry decided to issue travel warnings initially on this neutral basis. However, now it's sometimes used to issue a kind of threat to say we'll issue a travel warning and then fewer tourists will come. But that's really not the point. We're focusing on the safety and security of our travellers. The question for me, is it really up to the foreign minister to decide this, or is it actually the foreign ministry as such? Well, it is the foreign ministry. I don't know all the ins and outs about this. I don't know exactly how the political responsibilities interact at that level. It's really the experts for the specific countries who should take the decisions. I wanted to put a few more questions to Mr. Hartmann, but there are other people keen to butt in. Christiane Schlitzer, let me say a few words about you. If you open up the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and there's the famous page 3, which is a political editorial page, and Christiane Schlitzer is the woman behind this. She's also an expert on Turkey. She was a correspondent there for many years. I'll be continuing to travel there. So, Süddeutsche Zeitung, what did you want to say? You wished to interject, I believe. You wanted to correct the information. Well, yes, it wasn't a travel warning as such. It was a note that one should be somewhat more alert than usual, but it boils down to the same thing in a sense. It's a political event as well if it's pointed out that there are attacks in a certain country. There's a perceived danger and an actual danger, and those two threats are hard for tourists to really differentiate. Both existed for Turkey, a perceived and a genuine threat. Well, yes, you do need to distinguish between the two. Nonetheless, in this context, partly because of the media as well, it was said, in essence, if you travel to Turkey, they'll arrest you. That was what many headlines asserted, but the content of that was completely erroneous. If you were involved in public criticism of Turkey, there was a certain danger, but for your run-of-the-mill traveller, that was not the case. Putting that in the headlines is, I think, somewhat over the top and hasn't really been thought through properly. So what has changed then? Booking figures, and don't worry, we're not going to talk only about Turkey, but Turkey is an important issue. The figures for Turkey are increasing as well, a twofold increase in inquiries, but that's from a fairly low baseline level. So what's happening? Are people really coming rushing back again, having made a big fuss 18 months ago? I think we need to differentiate. There was a huge drop. It's improving again now. People travelled elsewhere and were perhaps not happy about those destinations because they've become very accustomed to travelling to Turkey. Prices have fallen very dramatically as well. There are also signs of détente as well from Ankara and from Germany as well. Dennis Yücel, journalist from Berlin, has been released, and others have also been released. For a while, nobody could be certain if they had Turkish roots or other political roots that they would be entirely safe if they travelled to Turkey, even if they went to Anatolia. That has changed now. Turkey says so, and it has de facto also changed as well. And there are very few people now from Germany who are in jail. Of course, that's not exactly the same for the Turks. A lot of them are still in jail because the state of emergency still exists. Mr. Hartmann, is this reflected in the booking figures? Well, yes. Just as you said. Let's take a look at the German market. A reduction of 30 to 50%, depending on precisely what you're talking about. City trips have dropped even more noticeably than seaside holidays. Booking figures are currently quite dramatic. But a few words now about Germany and other countries. Well, Mr. Hartmann, just a moment. Don't forget what you want to say. I don't want Mr. Hopfinger to feel left out. We didn't just ask him here to look decorative. We need your expertise, sir, as well. We'll come back to the question of different countries and different responses. Professor Emeritus Dr. Hans Hopfinger from the Chair of Cultural Geography. That actually does exist. Cultural Geography at the Catholic University of Eichstätt-Ingolstadt. You focus in particular on the Arab countries, inter alia, and I'm sure you'll be able to fill us in on that front. You've said that tourism responds like a shy deer. Is that really the case when it comes to current affairs? I have to say you've picked a very difficult topic because the impact of politics on travel is really very overarching and very differentiated. We could run the risk of focusing on a region or a country which has always been felt to be problematic, Turkey, the whole Arabic world, but we should not forget that in other parts of the world too, it's not so unproblematic. Politically, either there are countries where the death penalty still applies, the USA, nobody says that's a problem there, or China, which is an increasingly popular destination. Nobody talks about curtailment of human rights, political repression in China. We shouldn't talk just about Turkey or the Arabic world. We need to have a broader view. Of course, it is a seismograph. The seismograph is something which is used to measure earthquakes with great precision in the natural sciences. But if you look at politics, the situation is one where people respond very differently. People travel to certain destinations despite political unrest. That is, or was the case in Turkey. Others decide not to travel when there's political unrest. The title of this event asks whether this is a new factor, a new phenomenon. Well, certainly not. The influence of crises, wars, catastrophes is something that has been around forever. Tourism goes back to the days of the Romans and certainly to the days of the Industrial Revolution as far as we're concerned. When there were wars, people were always somewhat more reticent. Now, if you have Trump as US president, after a few months, 1 in 2 says no to travelling to the USA because they're against the political situation. That never existed in that form, did it? I would say this did always exist. Politics has always had an impact on people's decisions on where to travel. The question of the extent is what's different. The extent that you cited for the USA is quite dramatic and unprecedented, but if you think about the way in which you get our information, it's changed a great deal as well. Social media, the internet, we're kept up to speed in real time. Problems in other countries, that was previously not the case. Ms. Schlutz, I wanted to say too that it's not so new. There was a time when very few people travelled to Greece. That was because they felt there was a different picture of Greece. They were concerned about being looked at askew because they were German. That was when the economic crisis hit. As a journalist, people sometimes talked to me about Merkel or called me Merkel and meant something negative about that, but that has changed and there's a huge boom in tourism in Greece. That's been going on for the last 2 years. The impact of politics is one that's been around for a long time. But what I find amazing is that these problems pass so rapidly. Well, yes, I would say our collective memory is very poor and actually insufficient. If you think about wars and catastrophes, who can remember the last attacks in Tunisia and Egypt? Certainly in terms of precise details, our collective memory is very poor. We forget very rapidly. On the other hand, though, there is this negative image that gradually builds up over time and it sticks to a destination as if it was chewing gum. Mr. Hartman, it's not so much about a reputation sticking to a destination. The question is also how offensive the media are, how much of a proactive approach they take in denigrating a country over a long time period. Think also of a president who tweets every single day, quite apart from the fact that he's somewhat politically confused, if I may put it in those terms. Don't forget that every single day he's writing strange tweets on Twitter. People laugh about that. And they wonder how it's possible that you've got a clown being president. That's very present. But when that starts to drop off, when the media are not so present any longer, then I would say this reputation doesn't stick to a country so much as if it's pushed to one side. Let me give you an example. Bookings drop off in Germany because of attacks in Turkey. People across the board feel uncomfortable and uneasy when there are these kind of attacks. It doesn't matter where you come from, Sweden, Czech Republic, Germany. The question is as well, how much is a particular country affected? Was the German affected directly by an attack or a Czech? It stays then in the media longer, of course. And then there are political issues which have played a role for Germany as well. there was a conflict between Erdogan and Merkel. In other countries, that did not play a role. Tourists from Eastern Europe, for example, returned much more rapidly to Turkey. Turkish tourism is booming because of other nations, although we have this political crisis. For customers, nothing has changed in terms of the actual facts. As you say, it's become safer, there's improved security. If you address a lot of problematic issues in your newspaper relating to Turkish politics, I'd be careful in Turkey as well as a journalist, but for 99% of people that doesn't apply. Well, yes, we have the tourist experts sitting next to the journalists. That's quite interesting. Our collective memory as to crises and catastrophes is not just poor. Our collective perception is also selective. Think of the Arabic world. That's my academic background. Those countries had a very poor image in our media, and that has a knock-on effect on people's decisions about travel and what they actually do when it comes to travel. We need to differentiate. There are countries in the Arabic world where there's never been such an attack, where everything is peaceful. Think of the United Arab Emirates or Dubai. There's never been an attack there. Or Oman, absolutely peaceful tourist destination. But all of these countries merge into one in our perception. People feel it's much too dangerous. If I say to my friends that I'm going to Egypt again, they say, oh, no, not for me, it's much too dangerous. Mr. Hoffinger, just to ensure that we've addressed all of these issues, if certain tourists do not travel to a destination, can that have a positive political impact? Economically, in terms of macroeconomics, it causes an enormous amount of damage if tourists stop travelling to a destination. We all know that in certain destinations the entire economy depends on tourism to a very high degree. 15 to 20% of national income is generated from tourism and jobs as well in countries in the Arabic world, but there are also positive effects as well if there are not so many tourists, because then internally a process is initiated looking at why there are not so many tourists, what can be done to improve the image of the country, the pricing, the infrastructure. Mr. Schlitzer, in Turkey, everything in terms of infrastructure has stayed open. No hotels closed down. But of course it's different if you look at the coast and at Istanbul. Well, in Istanbul a great deal of problems have arisen. Small hotels, private rental accommodation, restaurants, a lot of people suffered. A lot of new tourists came from the Arabic world. There was a huge advertising campaign. Istanbul is full of such tourists. Western tourists, though, not just from Germany but from elsewhere, such as France, for example, have decided not to travel specifically to the cities. And Istanbul was very hyped as the New York of the East previously. A few words on political pressure. I think what we see in Turkey now, that the tone has become more moderate on both sides. And above all, that Turkey's being much more friendly towards Germany in its comments. I think that has a great deal to do with the political pressure generated by the fall in tourist numbers. I don't think anybody would admit that openly, but I was in Antalya in January. It was an official trip organised by the Turkish Tourist Association. Everybody said, not openly, but in private, that something really did have to change politically. So in that case, I think that political pressure has had an impact. Political pressure? Well, political pressure simply because tourists did not travel in such enormous numbers. For example, if you've got a 40% drop in tourist flows, or even 30%, that's really very striking. Look at the crisis in Greece. People didn't want to travel from Germany because everybody was laughing at our Chancellor. But I think the Scandinavian countries sent huge numbers of tourists in that period. It really boomed. Of course, prices dropped because of a fall-off in demand in countries where there was no political problem. Then, of course, the price effect acted as a magnet for other countries. It's not just one factor, it's all intermeshed. Today we're thinking about political topics which are more in the limelight for customers than in the past, but there's also the question of a decent price, good quality, having exactly the kind of holiday experience that you're looking for in the city, on the beach, wherever. That's another important factor. It's a little presumptuous to say that democracy is the best of all political systems. We can say so. We feel fine, everything is fine. Democracy and poverty is not straightforward. Those elements do hang together. Tourism brings money, it brings prosperity, it brings a middle class. It ensures upward mobility for them. That creates a basis for democratic developments. That is a crucial issue. We're often critical of tourists and say that they really mess up countries, but I think that in many countries around the world, they've made countries more open, more cosmopolitan, have improved the political setup. Tourism can really make a contribution for many poorer countries, even if it's just, for example, political pressure. I would say that tourism is more of a positive factor than a negative one.
So it's not all that easy. So I think that it's very important to look at it from different perspectives. Of course, there are also the dark sides, the shadow sides. So it's not only about the elites in the destinations get the jobs, but rather the lower levels that benefit from the jobs. But, well, all in all, I would say, I mean, they can have a positive impact. But I would like to get back to the first aspect that you have raised. So when you said that there was some kind of a shift away from German tourists towards Scandinavian tourists, and that, to me, shows very clearly that this is a globalized industry. And it is actually a role model for then the poster child of globalization, because it has the infrastructure, it has the booking systems, the social media, because they're all designed to support a globalized system. And that is a clear difference to what the situation was like 10 or 20 years ago. So because we can divert streams of tourists from one place to another. So when there are crises, and that's the interesting part, there might be some disruptions, but they only affect the destination as such. But in the entire system of tourism, these things do not really matter. When you look at the data from the United Nations World Tourism Organization, the oil crisis in the 60s and 70s, it didn't have an impact on tourism as such, and also SARS and the birds flu, I mean, hardly any impact. So onto the general sector. So then this diversion of streams of tourists, I mean, they also show in the bookings with the large tour operators, because when I, as a client, know that in my destination for August something happens, then the tour operator will take care of that and then put me somewhere else. I mean, so Ms. Schlutzer, so what about you? So what about your opinion on pricing and politics? I mean, when there are political problems, then there is hesitation among the tourists. But when you look at the price, can I use pricing in order to keep the attractiveness of one destination? I think to a certain extent it works like that. But there are different types of target groups. I mean, some people are only interested in the price, and others are more interested in the overall environment and what is going on in that country, because they want to feel good about where they travel, and they want to talk about it to their friends. I mean, they don't want to be afraid of talking about it. I mean, and that is true for some category of people. What I also see as an interesting example was Greece. During the crisis, they just stood back and did some rethinking. I mean, what used to be very expensive, and quite a lot of hotels were old, and people, however, didn't mind that at all because people still came and stayed there. But during the financial crisis, I mean, that gave them time to think, and people are rediscovering Greece because they have the feeling that the financial crisis has been overcome and the prices have gone down. That is prices for those who travel more individually, so the FIT. And so, for example, they know that it is a lot cheaper to go out eating and also to find good accommodation. And I believe that it is very important. And when people tell you that they have just traveled there and it's cheaper and nothing happened, I mean, that is also important. And you should also bear one thing in mind. I mean, when you have exceeded one type of price threshold, then you're losing a certain target group, because there are people who have a fixed budget of 1,000 euros for their vacations, but there are a lot of people in the Eastern and in Central Europe, but with a fixed budget. And then when you look at the countries such as Egypt or the other countries compared to what the situation is like in Greece, I mean, then you will lose them. And so I'm not really sure whether Greece would have a realistic pricing level today or it had in the past. I mean, I think that this is an open question, but I think that Greece has come back because the cost-benefit ratio has become better. I mean, compared to Spain and Portugal, for example. I believe one of the most important mechanisms that we have in order to control the situation, I mean, there's a very clear and relevant example, not from a third world country, but from the United States. After the attacks in the United States, so that was, I mean, I'm talking about 9/11, people didn't want to get on a plane. And, of course, the tourism sector suffered from that. I mean, because we can only reach U.S. by plane. And what did they react? How did they react? How did the hotels react? And within a few hours, they reacted by reducing the prices for 3-star hotels, and they reduced the prices down to $30 per night. And that is the neighboring states in California and others. They left immediately and they wanted to stay in Las Vegas, and there was actually no crisis in the tourism industry. So this was that you just changed the target groups through your pricing. So let's get back to the example of the United States. I mean, apparently there's some kind of core group of those who don't accept any compromises. 30% of the people, they say that you can't travel to the United States because you can't support President Trump's politics. And I have a question for all of three of you. So, Ms. Schlutzer, so if you get a question from one of your readers, so asking you whether they should travel to a country whose political system they don't accept or they don't like, that is a very difficult question, because I would like to answer that in different ways per different country. So I would say travel is good, because I don't travel to see the government, but I travel to see people. And when I want to see people, I want to meet people, then I need to go there in person. I need to travel. And I believe that for most countries, it is still better to travel and to show them to travel there and to show them they're interested in them, and maybe things will improve, but some kind of boycott I don't think would work. What is your take on that? Well, I believe an exchange of ideas, ideologies, political systems, religions are all very important. You start understanding the other ideology and religion. And when we have mentioned the U.S., I mean, I travel there quite a lot. And when I talk to people there, and some are Trump supporters, I mean, and when I talk to them and I see why they support them, and then I can understand them. And it is very important to hear all about that. And then they notice how shocked everybody else is and the rest of the world about what they portray to the outside world. And this also triggers some response to the masses. And that is, when you do that at a great scale, then that is wonderful. And I don't believe that 28% or your roughly 30% of people said that you shouldn't travel to the U.S. But I don't think that it has to do with the political system only, but maybe with others. I mean, I'm not really sure whether that is true everywhere. So if I were to ask the readers of the Süddeutsche, I don't. Maybe they would say the same thing, but I don't think the mass market would have the same opinion. There was a study that said that there is some reservations, but of course they have gone down as well. So people said that I'm not really interested in politics, and now 26% 1.5 years ago, then that has changed from 17%, and that people are saying that they don't feel welcome in the U.S. And that was the case 1.5 years ago, that it was 28%, and now they say that only to 17%. Well, with regards to the figures, I would be skeptical about them. I mean, these are some ad hoc surveys, and they may no longer be true tomorrow, depending on the changing world. But I personally do not agree with any type of travel boycott. I am a cultural scientist, so if tourism then is to contribute to a cultural understanding, and this is exactly what it does, you need to travel. You need to go to other countries. You need to get to know other countries and other people there. You need to know how they live. You need to know what problems there are, what challenges they are confronted with, and how they live. And it is not that you should just get into a closed holiday setting and then never see people. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. But what about the press and what about the media? I mean, there's always the claim that you may not be reporting the right facts. I mean, this is what you also said, Professor Hopfinger. So when you look at the media landscape in general, do you think that is accurate, or rather it is quite to the contrary, that we as journalists, we focus on stories on our front pages that have to do with scandals and crisis? But this is the idea, so that I want to travel there, so because I don't want to support the political system, but you won't find any information about that on the tourism pages. I mean, you can't say the media as such. I mean, there's no such thing. There are so many different types, and you all know. And the travel pages, I mean, they are not political pages, of course. I mean, of course, we have some political information on the travel pages as well, but journalism has the objective to represent reality. And sometimes, I mean, these are negative elements. Media, of course, have an impact on political attitudes, but only to the extent that they are reinforcing them. So this is a holistic picture, however. So the media is important, your friends are important, the general mood with regards to one country also plays an important role, and politics, of course, plays an important role. Trump or Erdogan or Paul. I mean, when you look at Poland and Hungary, so I mean, we haven't really actually talked about them here at all. Media are the conveyors of the messages, and they're not the generators. So Mr. Hartmann and Mr. Hopfinger, so every morning you would need to go through the newspapers and the medias, and then you would understand how the booking will develop. I mean, is it true that your bookings depend on the front of the headlines? So, and that there's a one-on-one correlation? Well, I mean, I would say yes. So when in the past few months, then I read all about the news about Turkey, so Erdogan here and Erdogan there, so I was really sure that we will have a reduction in bookings. And so I would say, well, there's a 100% correlation. But then this is the perspective to the outside world, but also the other way around is also important. The U.S., for example, that was an example of where to travel there, whether to travel there or not. But then the Americans themselves, they see that there are Neonazis and there are riots every weekend. Don't travel to Europe. But I mean, in general, I would say I don't like that either. But I mean, this is nothing that I see on an everyday basis, and I'm pretty safe traveling around in Europe. But this is exactly what all exchange is all about. If you don't talk to each other and then you don't tell the Americans that it is true that there is some kind of movement there, but this is nothing that we all want. And if we don't have this exchange, then we will have a problem, and this is the media's task and the media's function. So to correct that image, I mean, are the facts that we're hearing about, are they always true, and is, or the perception is that true, and how can we correct them? And I really like the media here in Germany. So in the only problem that I had with the media was about their reporting on Turkey. So there was highly exaggerated, and not only for the it had a bad influence on the tourism industry, but rather, I mean, there was an actual problem. I mean, I don't want to say anything about that, but it's some type of reporting that I didn't really like, but it's part of the democracy here that we have in Germany, that our media is not biased and is very good. So I can just support that. So we, of course, I mean, we could exchange the travel page with the front page, and then see whether you get even more in-depth information about the country. So not only the headlines about individual attacks and things like that. I mean, actually, I'm joking. All right. So we were all upset when China issued a travel warning for Germany, so after the attack on the Breitscheidplatz here in Berlin. And we here in Germany could not understand that at all. And of course, this is a matter of perspective and from how you look at things. I think there's always a difference between safety and security and political statements. Feeling safe, I mean, we need to be very cautious with that. And also with terms of domestic security, I mean, this is a completely clear matter. But I mean, if people are afraid about their safety and security, then why do travelers react differently depending on where they come from, so how they feel safe in one country and not another? But the clients, they don't read the travel warnings of the foreign office here in Germany, but they read the papers. So when there's a problem, so in Tunisia, for example, there were quite a lot of German clients and also Polish clients that were affected there, and they died. But the Czechs, they continued booking. So because you only read about this news on one day, and so in fact there was the reaction was the same. And then there was the tragedies of the families that were affected and the countries that were affected. I mean, this is something that the media needs to do. I mean, they need to represent the real world. I mean, as I said before, there is a perceived danger and there is a real danger. And in Turkey, we had both. Fortunately, so things are changing, but we don't know how long this will hold. And things can change very quickly. I'm not sure whether the situation is absolutely stable at the moment, because the entire region is not stable. When you just say, all's good now, then that would be just too simplified. Professor Hopfinger, let alone this feeling, this perceived danger. But what about the feeling of fear of being welcome? People do not travel to Poland and Hungary because they don't feel welcome there, because the politicians said things along these lines. Can you understand that? Of course I can. So as an individual, of course, I mean, if you don't feel welcome, you don't want to travel there. But scientifically speaking, so to what extent that is happening, I mean, that is, of course, very difficult. You just need to make your assumptions and make vague statements, because we don't have clear figures about that. Mr. Hartmann, in all this sector, in this business, that we think that we have all the figures to know all about it with all the statistics and things like that, but it's also about feelings, about perceptions. So where do I want to go? Who do I want to meet? What language do I need to hear? Or do I want to just spend time on the beach? Is it just all about feelings? I mean, when you go on a holiday, I mean, this has to do with feelings. I mean, it is, you don't go abroad on a holiday not for the fun of it, of being abroad, but rather to relax, to spend time with your family and things like that. And of course, it is all about feelings. And the way that you deal with feelings, I mean, when there are some type of some types of irritations, politically speaking, through unrests, riots and things like that. I mean, this is not really based on fact. I mean, when you travel, that's a fact, but the perception of quality is always very, very individual. Ms. Ritza, so to get you away from Turkey, I know that this is one of your focuses, but what about Catalunya? So there's something happening there, so you need to go there to feel the changing moods. Would you do that? A lot of people are doing it. Barcelona is one of the major destinations for city tourism. I don't think that it has become less or more so due to the crisis there. I haven't heard anything to change that with my friends. I mean, Cuba, for example, that is experiencing a boom because people want to experience the old Cuba as well. So, Professor Hoffinger, you have 30 seconds. So your recommendation for politicians, because here on the first day of the ITB, so we have them visiting the convention as well. So what about politics? What about political attitudes? I mean, we haven't actually talked about political attitudes, but rather about the politicians themselves. What should they do? I would ask them to apply more caution and be more mindful and look at things in great detail and then do something. So this is now people are applauding. I guess that's for what you are saying. Is that also your recommendation? Not really. I believe that politics do not really have a role to play in tourism. I think it is more about exchange, and it is very important for the economic development of a country. But using that in order to do your policies, to make your policies more efficient, I don't think I like that, not only from a business perspective, but also a personal perspective. Mentioning Italy, so that may just be sliding into a political crisis, and you will see that this will have no impact whatsoever on tourism there. So because Germans love Italy and they will always travel there. Thank you to all three of you for being here and for taking the time to sit here and discuss with us and among each other. So it is very important to take some time off from the hustle and bustle here. And thank you very much also to the audience. And I hope that you were following our discussion with interest and talk about it, share what you've learned with others. And thank you very much for your participation. And I hope to see you again next year for our interjections next year.